During the Third Age of Middle-earth, Sauron would never launch a direct assault upon Rivendell, the powerful elven city, and he would never confront Elrond in a face-to-face battle in the Third Age. But this leads to the obvious question, why not simply march his armies to Imladris and crush this elven stronghold once and for all? Well, in this analysis we will do an in-depth examination into why Sauron the Deceiver could not simply attack Rivendell by considering the catastrophic consequences of his earlier defeats, the fundamental magical constraints protecting Rivendell, the impossibility of exposing his diminished physical form to such risk, and the overwhelming strategic pressures that made Rivendell a secondary concern. But before we begin, don't forget, if you love Lord of the Rings lore and other fantasy content, then be sure to subscribe to my channel, Fantasy Spark. Firstly, it needs to be clarified that Sauron's avoidance of Rivendell in the War of the Ring was not because he had never attacked this elven stronghold before, but it's actually quite the opposite reason, as around the year 1697 of the Second Age, during the War of the Elves and Sauron's forces besieged the newly founded refuge of Imladris after Elrond retreated there with survivors from Eregion. Sauron had mastered all of Eredor save only for the besieged city of Imladris, yet he could not reduce Elrond's stronghold before Númenórean relief forces arrived and utterly destroyed his armies at the Gwathlo. The besieging force at Rivendell was then caught between Elrond and Gil-galad and completely annihilated. Simply put, Sauron was working with historical precedent that demonstrated Rivendell could not be taken by conventional siege warfare and tactics, and that the magical constraints protecting the city meant attempting another assault was strategically foolish and implausible. Furthermore, another critical reason as to why Sauron could not assault Rivendell directly was because the city was protected by Vilya, the mightiest of the three elven rings of power. This wasn't merely a matter of strong walls or brave defenders, but a permanent externalization of preserving and concealing power that made Rivendell extraordinarily difficult to find in the first place, and impossible to overtake without recovering the One Ring first. As both the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's writings depict, the three rings were forged for understanding, making, and healing, to preserve all things unstained. And critically, while Sauron did not possess the One Ring, the bearers of the three could resist and conceal themselves from his sight. Rivendell's location in a hidden valley surrounded by the misty mountains, accessible only by treacherous paths, and a single fort that Elrond could weaponize at will, made conventional military assault essentially impossible. Even the Nazgûl, Sauron's most powerful servants, were utterly thrashed when they attempted to pursue the Ringbearer across the river ford, with their horses destroyed by Elrond's flood and their power temporarily broken. So, with all things considered, attempting to storm Rivendell without the One Ring was a phenomenal waste of resources that would permanently cripple any offensive campaigns that Sauron may attempt. And lastly, it is crucial to understand that by the War of the Ring, Sauron was operating under catastrophic strategic pressure that made Rivendell a low priority target. As Unfinished Tales reveals, Sauron's original Third Age plan was to attack Rivendell and Lothlórien first, using Dol Guldur and potentially Smaug as weapons in a northern campaign. Yet that scheme collapsed when Gandalf orchestrated Smaug's death and the Battle of Five Armies, meaning that the window for a decisive northern offense had essentially been closed. If Sauron wanted to march armies from Mordor northwest against Rivendell, it would require passing through or around Gondor and Rohan, or pushing through Mirkwood while fighting Galadriel's Lothlórien forces, meaning this would be an exposed, lengthy, and costly campaign for Sauron, which would provide minimal strategic gain overall. So there we have it, Sauron did not march to Rivendell and challenge Elrond directly because he fundamentally could not afford the cost. The convergence of insurmountable factors created a perfect storm, a historical record of catastrophic failure when besieging Imladris in the Second Age, Vilya's power creating an impenetrable magical barrier which could not be overcome without the One Ring, Sauron's own diminished and vulnerable physical form not being powerful enough to fight Elrond, and the strategic, geographical complications of an exposed, northern campaign against Rivendell made the city all but impossible for Sauron to besiege or overtake. These combined limitations meant that Sauron had no choice but to ignore Rivendell for the time being, as an attack on Rivendell would be strategically pointless and exceptionally risky when the One Ring's recovery offered the only true path of complete victory for Sauron. So let me know in the comments down below if you enjoyed this video on why Sauron could not attack Rivendell directly, and what other videos you would like to see in future episodes. And as always, if you want to find out more about fantasy lore from epic franchises like Lord of the Rings, then subscribe to my channel Fantasy Spark.